It's important what took place with, with the almond tree. This is when, you ready to pray?
I'm ready, yes.
Okay. If you remember when the Israelites came out of Egypt, and the Israelites were known as a murmuring people. They complained about everything. Complained about not having water, about not having food. And in one occasion, they complained against Moses and Aaron because they complained and they said, well, why are you our leader? We're capable of leading the people as well. And a group of leaders rose up against the authority of Aaron and challenged Moses and Aaron. And so what did God do? In chapter 17, he explained, he told Aaron to take his rod, which was a branch from an almond tree. He said, take your rod, and he said, every leader that comes up against Aaron, take a rod as well. He said, and put it in a pile. Mark your names on it, and put it in a pile. And in the morning, we're going to see who it is that I've chosen to be the leader or the priest of Israel. And so, in number 17, we begin to see that Moses, in verse 6 says, so Moses gave instructions to the people of Israel, each tribe and tribal leader, including Aaron, and they all brought their staffs. Moses brought the staffs to the Lord's presence in the tabernacle of the tabernacle. And so, in verse 8, if someone can read verse 8 for me.
The next day Moses entered the tent and saw that Aaron's staff, which represented the tribe of Levi, had not only sprouted, but had budded, blossomed, and produced almonds.
Okay, so all the leaders of each tribe brought their own staff. And out of all of them, Aaron's started coming to life. So imagine a branch that had been broken off. Aaron was using it as a staff to walk. And he threw it in the middle. And the next day in the tabernacle, it began to blossom just like this tree. It had not only blossoms, not only the plant, but it also had the almond fruit on it as well. And so that was the determining factor to prove that it was Aaron that God had chosen over all the other leaders, all the other tribes, to be the priest of the tribe of the nation of Israel. And so what happened with that staff? Does anybody know what God commanded Moses to do with that staff?
Put it in the ark.
He put it in the ark. And so there's 3 items in the ark, and one of them was the staff of Aaron that budded. And so that's why it's called the resurrection tree, because it was Aaron's staff that was completely dead. It was broken, had no life, and the next day it came and it had life. Just like Jesus Christ, who was dead, buried in the grave, put in the tomb, and on the 3rd day he resurrected and brought life and brought us and gave us the ability to have life as well. So this is the almond tree. It's the first tree in Israel to begin to blossom. And so it's very significant because you see the story of Aaron's bud and Jesus was the first fruits of the resurrection. And so it's an amazing thing to see this tree, the almond tree.
Is the menorah also?
The almond tree, the menorah is based off of the almond tree. When it talks about the menorah in the tabernacle, it talks about the buds and the blossom, and the cups were based off of an almond fruit, the almond itself. So absolutely, the menorah was also based off of this tree as well. And so very interesting, very beautiful tree to see at. And again, it's just starting to bloom, so that's where you see all the white flowers. Any other questions on the almond tree?
She brought some almonds from Israel. No.
There were no almonds yet, but if we would stay a little longer, we probably would have been able to get some almonds. But the one tree that we did have was the date palms. And in India, you guys know about the dates. And they had a lot of dates all over the place, and so we had a lot of dates. This next trees that you see here, and I was kind of far, so I couldn't get it, but these are pomegranate groves. You guys ever heard of pomegranate? Those trees, I mean, and I'm talking about, when you see in Israel, when I talk about pomegranate groves, it's rows after rows after rows of pomegranate trees. It's an amazing sight, and they were just starting to bloom. The fruit wasn't edible yet, but I mean, this was just one little valley we went to. This was by the city named Lachish, and I just took a picture. I mean, this picture went on for miles, just the pomegranate trees. And the Bible mentions pomegranates. It's a very delectable fruit. It's very known, and so I just wanted you guys to see a picture of what the pomegranate groves and trees look like. This is not a tree, but it's a shrub or plant. It's called the frogel plant. Frogell. Frogel plant. And why I took a picture of this, because as you know, in Israel, and especially in the Old Testament times, there were nomadic tribes. They moved around, and still to this day in Israel, there's a group of people called the Bedouins. Bedouins are nomadic. They don't live in a particular place. They're sheep herders, goat herders, and they move from area to area. There's not too many left because obviously Israel is becoming overpopulated. But these nomadic people, as you know, they live in tents. They're tent dwellers, just like Abraham was. And since you live in a tent, you know, you have no bathrooms, you have no showers, you have no running water. And so they take this plant, and we tried it. It's an amazing thing. Everybody here has one time or another have used hand sanitizer, right? Everybody knows what a hand sanitizer. This is a natural hand sanitizer. So what they do is they take those little yellow buds and they pull them all off of a branch, and they have a bunch of these little yellow buds in their hands, and they begin to rub them in their hands. And when you rub them together, it cleanses your hands, but it gives off a fragrance. It's like almost like a perfume, and it leaves your hands clean. So before they eat, they take this off, and that's how they wash their hands, with the Frogel plant. And it's amazing. We did it, and my hands they smelled clean for the rest of the day. It was a beautiful thing. And so this is, if you want to say soap or hand sanitizer in the desert, in the wilderness, it's the Frogel plant. Now, what's interesting as well, and the women, you guys will get a little kick out of this, and maybe you could decide if you would ever want to be a Bedouin or not. The women, as you know, they have camels and sheep and goats, and in the summertime when it gets really hot, there's a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of flies. And so in order to keep the flies off of them and to clean their hair, they'll take the urine of a camel. And they take camel urine and they wash their hair when you get camel urine. And not only it makes their hair healthy, but it keeps all the flies and mosquitoes away. And so when they were telling us that, I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. So I was imagining the women. Yeah. So imagine wives wash their hair with camel urine, but imagine husbands having to sleep next to your wife that night in the tent. You know, imagine it. Living the life of a Bedouin is not easy. It's not easy.
Maybe I should sell it on Amazon.
Yeah.
It'll become a big business.
Yeah, but so this is what the Bedouins used to wash and clean their hands before they eat. Okay. Now, this is an amazing tree. It's a pretty big tree, grows pretty big, and these fruits right here are a little green, maybe the size a little bit bigger than grapes. They have a hard shell on the outside with the fruit in the inside is very tender. It's the consistency of a mango. Have you ever eaten a mango? It looks like mango, but just a miniature version. Really small mango. Now, this is important. Let's look to Matthew chapter 3. And this is why it's important to, when we study the Bible, it's important to know Hebrew. It's important to know the history of Israel. It's important to know the culture, the geography, because as you know, when things were translated in our versions of the Bible, we translated with the Western mindset, but we don't realize the culture, the geography, the landscape of Israel, and so things get lost in translation. But look in Matthew chapter 3, and someone read for me verse 4. This is talking about John the Baptist, and what does it say in John chapter 3 verse 4?
Now John himself was clothed in camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locust and wild honey.
Okay, so we're talking about everybody knows John the Baptist, right? So what does the Bible describe? Well, how did John the Baptist dress? What does it say there? How was he dressed?
With
Camel's hair.
camel's hair.
Camel's hair. So he was not dressed like everybody else. He wore particular clothing. And what did John the Baptist eat?
Locust and wild honey.
Locust and honey. And so when we read that, obviously we know what honey is, and everybody here has seen at one time a locust, right? We know what locust is. And so for years we've been taught that John the Baptist ate locust and honey, and in our Western mindset, the translation is locust like a grasshopper, like a cricket, right? Well, in reality, if you go to Israel and you see this tree is called a locust tree. And those fruit right there are called locust. And so it is believed, and it's thought, and it's believed, and it's probably true, because it's found all over the Judean wilderness, these locust trees, that when John the Baptist ate locusts, he was eating this fruit.
Oh, that's
And so he was eating locust and honey. And so they said, I have another picture. So that's another picture of the fruit. So these fruit right here is what's called locust. And so again, that's why it's important to, we're not only learning Hebrew, because if you read in the Old Testament, when it mentions the word locust, it's a completely different Hebrew word than when it mentions here in Matthew. And so that's how we can demise that he most likely ate this fruit and honey. And so he lived off the land. So it wasn't so much that he ate the locust itself. I mean, so very interesting. When we saw it, I was like, wow. So that's why understanding the culture, understanding the idioms, understanding the land, you're able to be able to decipher certain things in the Bible that sometimes we take for granted because of our Western mindset. And so for years, we thought he ate grasshoppers, but he was actually eating the locust, which is from the locust tree. And it's, like I said, it's small, and it's the consistency of a mango. You break the hard shell, and it has the yellow fruitish inside, and very tasty, very good.
Does it have any seeds
Yeah, we ate one. Yeah,
inside?
they were just coming in season. They weren't as ripe as they should be, but they were a little bit tart, but it was very edible. It wasn't bad. You could tell it would be very good. So,
Do
but
they
they're
have
everywhere.
seeds inside?
No,
No.
it's just like a mango. You know, if a mango has this one seed, the one big seed, and the
Yeah,
fruit is around it,
yeah.
just like that. It has one
Oh,
little
okay.
pit,
Yeah.
and then the fruit. It's like a fiber all around it.
Oh,
like a yellow
Does
fiber.
it grow in the forest or?
Yeah, all over. It's wild trees all over, and it's real close. This area where we took this was by the Dead Sea. This was near Engedi. Engedi is famous for the springs of Engedi. That's where David hid from Saul, in those springs and those caves. And so it grows in the wilderness, right near the Dead Sea. So John the Baptist would have been in this area. That's where he was at, and he most likely would have ate from us.
To me, it looks like more like a creeper, you know.
Oh, like a
than-
bush
than a-
almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
than a tree.
I took it.
you know.
I took it kind of close up to get the fruit,
Yes.
but the tree was pretty
Oh,
high
okay.
tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of zoomed the camera just so I can focus in on the fruit. But it's like a normal tree. It would grow probably about 30, 40 feet high,
Okay.
and so maybe a little bit lower, but regular tree. And all over the desert, you can find these locust trees everywhere. And so I'm actually all over Israel. We found them in the north, the south, everywhere. But very interesting.
Yes, it is.
This is what a
because
locust
This is a
is.
fruit that we don't know about.
We don't know about over here. Over here,
Not
we don't
at
have
all.
it. No.
That's strange.
Yeah, and in Israel you go and they know it's called the locust tree, and they know it's the locust fruit, and so that's what we believe that he ate. Yeah? Anybody have a question? Did you have a question? Now this is a beautiful tree, and it's also biblical. This is the sycamore tree. How many have heard of the sycamore tree? What famous event took place at the sycamore? Anybody remember? Zacchaeus climbed the sycamore tree. And this sycamore tree this was actually in Jericho where he took this. And so this most likely is not the sycamore tree he climbed, but it was actually right there in Jericho when Jesus passed through and Zacchaeus was there. And so as you can see, it's not a high tree, but it's easy to climb, and the limbs are huge limbs. And so you can see Zacchaeus sitting right in there on one of those limbs and waiting for Jesus to pass through. And so for those of you who know the story, that he was a small guy, couldn't see it, so he climbed up so that Jesus could see him. So this is the sycamore tree. Now this was just coming into season as well, and the sycamore tree also produces like a little nut, like a little fruit as well, and it's edible, but only certain times of the year it's edible. If you take it right now when it first starts growing, it's very poisonous and you can die. And so what's interesting about the sycamore tree is, how many have, let's turn to Amos. Amos chapter 7. Amos chapter 7. And this is just a little side note on the sycamore tree, because it's also mentioned in Amos. But Amos was, if you read the book of Amos, Amos was not a regular, chapter 7.
Thank you.
Amos was not a prophet. If you know, Amos was what? Does anybody know what Amos was?
Shepherd.
He was a shepherd. He was a shepherd, that's what he was. And God decided to speak to him. And in Amos chapter 7, it tells us what he was doing when God spoke to him. And he was working on sycamore tree. So let's read 7:14, and then we'll explain what was going on here. Amos chapter 7, verse 14.
Then answered Amos and said to Amaziah, I was no prophet, neither was I a prophet's son, but I was an herdman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit.
Okay, so when Amos got the word of the Lord and he began to prophesy to Israel, the priest of Israel and heard what he was saying, and he got mad. And he told Jeroboam the king, he said, look, we got to get rid of this guy. He's bringing some bad words. He's trying to get you dethroned. And so they came against Amos and said, why don't you go back into Judah and prophesy in Judah and make money over there and leave us alone? And so Amos responds, look, I'm not even a prophet. I'm just a sheep herder. I'm a shepherd. And at the same time, I gather sycamore fruit. And so what's interesting about that, and again, this is why it's good to know the culture, know the history of Israel. In ancient times, like I said, this fruit of the sycamore tree was poisonous unless something was done to it. Somebody would have to literally climb the sycamore tree, and while the fruit was still hanging on the tree, you couldn't pluck it, but while it was still hanging, someone had to go and with a sharp instrument, a knife or something, would have to carve out a hole in the fruit. So imagine someone climbing that tree, and the tree was littered with the nuts, the fruit, going, and they would literally carve a hole into each nut. And when they did that, like a kind of a liquid, which was poison, would begin to seep out. And as that liquid began to seep out, and it's amazing, a certain bee that's found in Israel, a wasp, would come and would go inside that hole and would pollinate the fruit. And then it would leave, and within a week or two time, that fruit would now become edible. So whatever the bee would do inside the hole, it would pollinate it, ferment it, and so it would become edible. So when Amos, who was a shepherd, what they would do is, in that time there were certain places in the north that were arid. There was no grass everywhere. So wherever there was tree, there was usually grass around it. So the shepherds would bring the sheep or the goats to where the grass was. So if you owned a vineyard or trees or the herds of the sycamore trees, you would allow the shepherd to bring his sheep to eat the grass. And then what happens when the sheep eats the grass? Eventually he fertilizes the grass as well with the droppings. But the shepherd, while the sheep were feeding on the grass, the shepherd usually would climb the tree. And when Amos says, I was a gatherer of sycamore fruit, it wasn't that he was gathering. If you look the original Hebrew word, it literally says that he was a harvester. Or in other words, he was one that would go and drill the holes in each of the fruit. So Amos, when the Lord probably spoke to him, Amos was there, his sheep were grazing, and Amos was probably in a sycamore tree, carving out a hole in each one of these fruits. And that's when the Lord decided to bring the word to him. And so that's why he says, I was a sheep herder, I was a shepherd, and a harvester of the sycamore fruit. So it's pretty amazing to see it, and now in our time to see that that's how to do it, and that's most likely what Amos was doing. So you guys follow that?
Do you think they still do that?
They don't do it as much anymore.
I was
No.
just gonna say,
I think in certain sycamore they breed them, so now the fruit is a little more, whatever process it's edible now. They don't have to go through that whole process, but in those days, that's what they would do to be able to eat the fruit. If not, it was poisonous.
Do they still put the holes before they eat? Or?
Like I said, it's some of them they do, but for the most part, no. I think they don't eat the sycamore fruit as much as they used to. I think what Dr. Rose is saying is not the most tastiest fruit or fruit to eat, and so it doesn't have too much value as far as nutrition. But in ancient times, you would eat that because that's what it was there. So pretty amazing the process just to get that, and that's a sycamore tree.
I wonder how they discovered that they had to do that.
Yeah.
How they did, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it must be, like I said, they still do it, so it must have been carried down through tradition. But to me, what amazed me is when you read Amos, and he said, look, I was a shepherd and a harvester of this fruit. And so that's literally what he was doing. And so it's pretty impressive to see that. That's the sycamore tree. Now, this is a bad picture. I had another one and it didn't come in clear, but I don't want you guys to see this tree. This is just a regular evergreen tree, a pine tree. But the tree in the background, which I was trying to get, it's a huge tree. Can you guys see the one in the background? Mm-hmm. That's called the cedar. That's a cedar of Lebanon. And that's a very famous tree. And as you see, I try to zoom in and I couldn't see on my iPad too well. That's why I couldn't. But that tree grows easily to 100 feet or more high. It's a humongous tree. The cedar of Lebanon is biblical as well. If you read in 2 Samuel, in the book of Chronicles, it talks about the cedar of Lebanon, that when David was building up Jerusalem, King Hiram of Tyre sent him cedars of Lebanon, and that would be the tree that, so he was sent to Jerusalem to
So
build
it's
up.
really huge.
It's big, and the wood is some of the best wood to build. In ancient times, it was one of the strongest woods in Israel. Over here in the States, we have oak trees and maple trees, but in Israel, there's some oak, not a lot, but this would be the tree that they would use to build. And what it is, it's the Bible also tells us, and I believe in the book of Ezra, I believe, that when they would bring the cedars of Lebanon, which is in the north, they would bring them down into Jerusalem through the Mediterranean. They would float them down through the Mediterranean and sail them down, and so that's the way they brought them. But that's the tree that was used to build Jerusalem. In 2 Chronicles, I believe it talks about that the king of Tyre as well sent the cedars of Lebanon to Solomon, and that's what Solomon used to build the temple. And so the temple was built with the cedars of Lebanon, and obviously with stone and with rock, but the wood that was used was the cedars of Lebanon. And so I think Psalms mention cedars of Lebanon in poetic form many times, because it's a strong tree. It's a tree that grows high and strong, and so the psalmist David uses the cedars of Lebanon many times, comparing who God is in his life. And so that's the cedar. I'm sorry I don't have a better picture, but just to know it was a big tree and it grows all over. And so it's to the north in Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon. But now they're growing pretty much everywhere in Israel. This is probably one of the most famous trees in Israel. That's talked about the most in the Bible, or in Christianity we talk the most about. This is an olive tree. This is what an olive tree looks like. And the reason why I took this picture is because it's very important for us as Christians today. To save time, but you could go back later and read Romans chapter 11. And Paul talks about he talks about the olive tree, but in comparison to two different types of people. Who knows who he's comparing in Romans 11? Does anybody know?
Grafting in the
grafting of who? Grafting of that Israel is the olive tree, and who's been grafted in?
Gentiles.
Us, the Gentiles, right? And so it's important because and I think other trees do it too, but the olive tree in particular, grafting is seen mostly, and it's an amazing sight, because it's okay if I get up with it.
Yeah.
If you see in the olive tree, the natural branch looks like this. You see how it looks like regular bark. It's gnarly. It gets twisted all up. This would be a natural branch. Now a grafted branch would be this branch. You see the difference, how it's nice and smooth and it looks white. It's totally different. That is a grafted branch. And so when Paul describes Israel being the natural branch, or the natural root of the olive tree, and we the Gentiles, we the church, we have been grafted in, and now we are one. This is it right here. This is the picture what Paul is talking about in Romans chapter 11. And so if you can see, that branch has been grafted in, but it looks like it's natural to the regular tree. It grows, it's big, and it starts off when you graft off the branch, it starts off with a little twig. It's just a little twig, a little offshoot. They cut it into the wood, they tie it up, and they let it grow, and eventually it'll grow. And it'll grow into something like that. And so this is a picture of being grafted in. So every one of us here, we've been grafted in. That's who we are. We're the wild branch. That we're not natural, but we've been grafted into the roots. We've been grafted into the natural tree, and we've been accepted, and now we are one. And so that's just a beautiful symbolic picture of who we are today as believers in Christ.
Why are they grafting in the olive tree? Why are they grafting?
Why? Because,
not the other
and I'm going to show another picture next week, but the olive tree is probably the most amazing tree you can study. The olive tree, and the reason why I believe that God uses the olive tree as symbolic of Israel. First of all, olive branches are known all over the world as a symbol of peace. You take an olive leaf, olive branch is symbolic of peace. But an olive tree, basically, it does not die. It's an indestructible tree. You can cut an olive tree all the way down to its stump. And as long as there's one root or a little bit of that stump in the ground, it'll start growing again. It'll keep regenerating. And so an olive tree always keeps reproducing. It always has life. It doesn't die. Very symbolic of Israel. Some things that they cut down, they try to destroy people, so many different types of people, and it continues to grow, continues to prosper. And so the reason why they graft is because it's so easy to graft. I mean, remember, what is produced from an olive tree is olives. And olives is the number one resource of Israel. And so it's very important. It's part of their, for their food. They use it for ceremonies. They use it for cleansing, for healing. They use the oils. And so the olives, and so the more olives you can get, the better. So they'll graft branches or twigs off another tree and put it so it'll begin to grow. And so almost every olive tree you'll see, there'll be branches that have been grafted in.
I think it's from a stronger plant that they graft onto the
Sometimes no. Sometimes it's just like a little shoot that's growing off of wilds, or maybe another tree that it's not an ideal location, or maybe your olive tree is not producing as much as it once was. So they'll bring in a grafted branch,
Yeah.
and this is why in Deuteronomy, I believe chapter 30, 32, it talks about the purpose of the grafted branch. Because what happens is when you bring a grafted branch in, now it not only begins to grow, but the natural branch now sees it, and it energizes the natural branch to start producing more. Where at one time maybe it wasn't produced that much, once you introduce a grafted branch, it almost brings the natural branch to jealousy, and it makes it want to grow more because, like, wait, who is this invader coming in?
We have competition.
Yes, and so it'll make the natural branch start growing more, and the grafted one coming in. So that again is symbolic, because when in Moses in Deuteronomy 32, when he gave his prophetic song, he basically said there's going to come a time when Israel is going to reject the rock, which the rock we know as Messiah. And it says, and because you have rejected the rock, it says that God is going to turn his face and he's going to choose a foreign, someone that was not natural, and make them his. And what he's going to do is bring them to his, and by doing so is going to cause Israel to become jealous. And so the whole idea of Israel rejecting the Messiah, rejecting God, rejecting the commandments, going after other lovers, and bringing the Gentiles in, is that his mercy, his grace, that he loves the world, everyone to be saved, but also the ultimate plan was to get the natural born Israelite, the Jew, to become jealous of our relationship with Messiah, with God. And so that's the whole symbolic picture of the olive tree. The wild branch, when it begins to grow, should promote jealousy into the natural branch, which is the Jew. We're talking about the Jew and the Gentile. And so very symbolic, very beautiful, but that's a grafted branch right there. Now this is what we call in most of the olive trees, this is called the wild shoot. This is where they would take, these are pretty much already beginning to grow, but if you were going to take a wild shoot, you would cut one of these off when they're a little smaller and graft that into a bigger tree. This is the shoot. This is, if you read Isaiah chapter 11, when it talks about that there would be a stump, and from the stump of Jesse would grow a shoot, and from there that would be the Messiah. That's what he's talking about. You can cut an olive tree down to a stump, and always it'll start growing little shoots off to the side, and this is what an olive shoot looks like. It's called the Netzaim. Netzaim is a wild shoot. You and I, as Gentiles, we're considered Netzaim. We're not natural, we're the wild shoot. We're shoots that come off and grow off of the roots of Jesse. So this is what we are. And so they would cut this and graft it into the tree and begin to grow as one.
Did they show you how they did the grafting?
No, we didn't see it there. I've seen it before in other videos, but usually what they do is they just take a little notch. They cut a little notch. They take the branch and they just put it in there. They tie it around and they just let it go, and it begins to grow that way. It's an amazing thing that it really, they don't do much to it, you know. And what's interesting, I believe, and you'll know when a grafted branch, when the tree is accepted, because after 3 days, you'll know on the third day, every time on the third day is when you'll know if the tree has accepted or rejected it. Always on the third day. So it's very symbolic. This is right outside Jerusalem. This is the Garden of Gethsemane. This is, everybody knows the garden. This is where Christ, where he was betrayed, where he was praying. And these are olive trees. This is in that place. As you know, the Garden of Gethsemane is the place of olive pressing. This is where they would have pressed olives. And they would have made olive oil. This is where Jesus was. So just want you to see from a distance these olive trees. This one here is literally, you can see Dr. Coke a little bit in the foreground there. But this tree is right next to the place where they believe where Christ prayed. And they believe this tree is about 2,000 years old. So that olive tree would have been in the garden around the time that Christ was praying. And so we don't know exactly if it was ready, but if you see, an olive tree doesn't grow straight up like normal trees. It grows and the offshoots grow off and it gets twisted and all together, and it grows more wider than it does higher. But that tree right there is believed to be at least 2,000 years old. So pretty interesting to know that was probably there during the time of Christ. That's again another olive tree. That's in another place that's believed to be close to 2,000 years as well. You can see it's a bunch of just different branches growing together, twisting together, and that's what an olive tree is. This was just a lemon tree. I saw it. It was very pretty. It was in the middle of nowhere. A lemon tree was just growing. This was an orange tree. This was on top of Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor we know it as the Mount of Transfiguration. That's where Jesus was transfigured. And right outside there was an orange tree just growing right there, so I took a picture of it. That's just to get you guys a little jealous. That was on the Dead Sea. We were staying, that's our hotel, we're staying right at the Dead Sea, and that's the sunrise. I was outside praying that sunrise at the Dead Sea. And so those mountains in the background are Jordan. That's the country of Jordan, and that's the sun rising right there on the Dead Sea. Beautiful, beautiful sight. The Dead Sea is an amazing place. If I don't know if you guys heard, but the Dead Sea is it's the lowest place on earth, the lowest place on earth, and the water is the salt content is so high, which is not a red salt, it's more of a sulfuric salt, sulfuric acid. But literally, you go in that water and you float. You cannot drown. You go in the water and you try. Yeah, I went in the water and automatically because most of us are more heavy on the bottom. The water just automatically turns you over and you're just laying on your back, and you don't have to swim, you don't have to paddle, and you just float and you stay there for hours. And it's an amazing thing. And people come from all over Israel because they believe the waters have a healing process to it, so they come for healing.
I saw in one of the TV channels, like one lady, she always, since she guides people, they were showing about she does it because she wants to walk in the path of Jesus. And, and she, finally they went here and they just...
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And the thing that's incredible about the Dead Sea is the waters are receding because of what I mentioned before. What Israel has done is the Jordan River that comes from Mount Hermon flows into the Dead Sea. But they've diverted most of the Jordan River to go to the southeastern part of Israel, which is the Negev desert. And so the water of the Jordan now flows into the Negev. And so that's where what was once desert is now plentiful, and there's trees and plants and vineyards everywhere because there's water flowing into it, and the ground is fertile. But because they diverted that water, only a little portion gets into the Dead Sea, and so the Dead Sea is receding because of its salt contents, and it's in the middle of a desert. I forgot how many millions of gallons of water a day are being evaporated, and so if they don't do anything soon, within 10 years, the Dead Sea is going to be almost completely gone. But what's interesting about the Dead Sea is that the Dead Sea produces what the Bible calls potash. It's a substance called potash, and it's the best fertilizer in the world. You can take potash and you can put it on ground that's not fertile, and stuff will begin to grow. It's the most fertile, it's the best fertilizer in the world, and it's produced from the Dead Sea, from the salt from the Dead Sea, the sulfur. And so Israel exports potash to all of Africa, to Europe, to Asia. It's behind the citrus fruit, it's the second top export of Israel. It's the potash, and they make